Hello, and welcome to The Conversation. My name is Shannon Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of Not Just Blacks and Jews in Conversation. And I have just arrived back from Israel after an arduous but extremely pleasant a week and a half in the cradle of religious civilization. Normally we would have a guest, but everybody is so exhausted and tired that they've decided to let me go it alone. And I'm here to give the preliminary report. You'll be hearing more in the coming weeks. And it was a memorable time. We'll have a lot of fun in the next half an hour. Of course, Israel and the Middle East can be quite a lot of fun. Just forget about what the papers concentrate on, and concentrate on what we were there for, which was to have a great time and live the stories that you read about, that you sing about, and to see the wonderful development from one end of the country to the other. Of course, we could discuss, and we will, all of the many issues that are on every government's mind, but primarily we want to talk about why you would travel to such a distant land from here, and of course why you continue to read and study about it. We started out in Tel Aviv, and there was a time when you would land from El Al, which means up into the skies, and land in Tel Aviv, which is the principal seacoast town, and there'd be a burst of applause. Nowadays, the applause is limited because people are so tired they have to be woken up. And the flights were, contrary to misgivings, superb. There were no babies screaming and crying. There were no toilets filled up with diapers. And we left at night, and we arrived to go to the ambassador from the United States to Israel, Ambassador Jones. And these ambassadors don't live it up as might be expected. The offices are quite nice, but the buildings are there for a long time, and the reception is always inviting. The discussion concentrates on people coming and going, and there was a recent murder beforehand. Fortunately, it wasn't while we were there, but a poor kid from Florida was dead of his wounds, and we came afterward, and you may have read about it. Ambassador, of course, was central to the care of the family, and this is the sorry part of what ambassadors do. The nice part is that I was there, met my brother-in-law David, who was with the Weavers group, and Pete Seeger lives on, the music lives on. Bruce Springsteen has a hit record, but he got the whole idea from my brother-in-law's group, and so David deserves the credit for this. And as usual, the credit for our dialogue goes to us in bringing members of the Hispanic, Asian, African-American, Irish, German communities together with Jews, and then everybody will model future trips from us and forget about us. We're easily forgotten, but the ideas are there to stay. And from there we had a walking tour of Tel Aviv. I remember the part of Tel Aviv that my cousins used to live in was called the Beverly Hills of Tel Aviv. Now they have a different name for this. The Beverly Hills has moved further out, and the original Beverly Hills is more likely some old and forgotten section. Ben Gurion's home is in that same section, and it's quite empty. And it's sad. It's sad that what was once treasured becomes forgotten. You know, what people hardly even remember Ben Gurion, and it's such a short time since he had the courage to declare independence. Our new hotel was located directly across from where the Altalena had been blown up. This is also part of Jewish history, where you had heroes like Ben Hecht and Rav Kook, not the first Rav Kook, the second Rav Kook, who had combined forces from all over the world to bring much-needed arms to Israel. And you're going to get the real truth from me, because you don't get the real truth from everybody else. We had a wonderful guide's fee, but the real truth is as follows, that Frank Sinatra and a whole host of figures, very colorful, managed to get, yes, machine guns and small arms and all kinds of weapons onto that ship to liberate Jerusalem back in 48. And unfortunately to Ben Gurion, Jerusalem was not so essential. It was essential to have a country, and to his great credit, he overrode everybody and declared the independence that nobody wanted to see take place, especially the British. But there was a ship that came with weapons that would have liberated Jerusalem. And there was an agreement made with Menachem Begin and the Irgun to divide the weapons. And why you have to have an agreement about weapons when you have hardly any weapons to begin with is only a Jewish thing. But when the ship came to divide the weapons, it was an ambush. And it was an ambush directly across from the building that used to be the headquarters of the we might say, the Loyalist forces. And the Loyalist forces, or the regular army, opened fire with a mortar shell that set fire to the boat. And 19 freedom fighters were killed, many shot in the ocean from which they had been blown into with their arms raised, and the commander who gave the order to fire that shell was Itzhak Rabin, and he called it the Holy Cannon. These are facts. And when I saw the Menachem Begin Pavilion in Jerusalem, a tribute to Prime Minister Begin, who was 29 years in the opposition before he became Prime Minister, they omitted the fact that it was Itzhak Rabin that gave the order. And, of course, the original details to capture the ship came from Moshe Dayan and from Ben Gurion, who had no intention to keep his agreement or his word to divide the weapons. He hated Begin so much as a rival, as a political rival for leadership of the country, that he wouldn't even mention him by name. And there would have been civil war between the forces of the Irgun and the Stern at that time, who were very successful liberating factors and blowing up Arca prison, held by the British to capture Jews, and also having blown up the King David Hotel, the military headquarters of the British. There would have been a civil war after the Altalena was blown up by the Jews, between the Irgun and the Haganah, the Palmach, and so on. But Menachem Begin laid down a principle which apparently has carried through to today, that there should never again be a repetition of Jewish history, a civil war between one force and the other force. And at the entrance to his presidential library, so to speak, in Israel, he wants to be remembered primarily for this, that he stopped civil war in Israel. And all his followers, whether it be Sharon or whether whoever it is, or the three MKs whose heads were cracked in by police, even though they were offering no resistance at Amona, Eitan and so on, they maintain this principle: there shall be no civil war among Jews. And no matter what one side might do to the other, there shall be no civil war. And of course, on the mission that we went on, there wasn't even a suggestion that there was a thought of civil war. Apparently everything is under control. And the result of the lost ship of the Altalena was the loss of the weapons. You can't recover weapons once you blow them up. And the loss of Jerusalem. Of course, the fighters waiting for this lost the Battle of Latrun, which was heavily fortified by Jordanian troops, which held the high ground and fired on the Jewish soldiers below. My father was one of the fighters there, and it's amazing he survived that, because many Jews who had come straight out of the concentration camps were just handed whatever guns they had and didn't even have time to be trained in firing them, and they were just picked off. It was like the Russians in World War II that were given one musket for every 10, because as soon as one was shot, you just handed the musket to the next, and the next, and the next, till all 10 were dead. And the same thing at the Battle of Latrun, where you had a few guns, but you didn't have the skills to fire them. And these weapons of the Altalena would have gone to those who had the skills to use them. And instead, under the principle of Ben Gurion, we needed one army. The principle was you needed one prime minister named Ben Gurion. That was the principle. Not that you needed one army, you needed one prime minister, Ben Gurion, and Menachem Begin was dealt a political death blow. And he was on television crying over the division, and people in the electorate saw it as a Ben Gurion success, not a terrible loss for the Jewish state. And so even to this day, Jerusalem remains a question, even after unification and annexation, and we had Jerusalem Day on our tour, celebrating its unification. Jerusalem remains a question because this ship was blown up by Jews under Ben Gurion, Dayan, and Rabin's leadership. Had that not happened, there would never have been a question that Al-Quds, as the Muslims referred to it, was Jewish. It would have been liberated. It would have been won. It would have been our capital, and the embassy would have been in it from its first days. And that's where they picked our hotel. It was a delightful hotel, the Don, and we heard from the editor of legal affairs from leading Israeli newspaper Haaretz, and we had a beautiful Sabbath in Tel Aviv, and strolled up and down massive, massive new building, and of course the old port city of Jaffa. And Jaffa is known for much history. It's where the head of the Medusa was grabbed by Perseus on his horse Bellerophon, the flying horse, to turn the kraken to stone so that he could save Andromeda. And on a huge rock of mythology is a tiny little rock there in Jaffa. And it also commemorates the St. George slaying the dragon, and much folklore about Jaffa. Napoleon couldn't take Acre, he couldn't take Jaffa, and he left Israel to British control in the early 1800s, and it remained Arab until the Independence War. Now they have theaters and they have art galleries. It's a major artist colony. It's a beautiful sight. Everywhere you went in Israel, you saw green, you saw trees, you saw quite a lot of beauty growing right out of the desert. And the next night we went up to the north to a fabulous kibbutz, might as well have been Epcot, where you had underground streams turning into waterfalls and gardens with statues and memorial sculptures, and the birds never stopped singing, and we had all of 4 hours to enjoy the place and be woken up early in the morning to go tour the Golan Heights and the captured Syrian embankments, where you could look down on the Valley of Tears. And we went through the Syrian gun turrets, and from those gun turrets you could see that they could command the entire north of Israel. And in 73, I don't know how many thousand tanks they poured into the breach, and they could have continued on unstoppable, but fortunately the Syrians decided to nap. And they took a night rest, and they had more sleep than we did the entire tour, and that enabled the Israelis to recover their senses and beat them all the way back, pound them all the way further than even in the 67 war, to Quneitra. And then, of course, as is the way of the world, they, instead of keeping it all, gave a good portion of it back, and that's no man's land or in that section. And the rockets kept firing for a while, and then later they had the Lebanese liberation, and 3 years there, and we remained in that section that was retained and settled. And the Druze, a certain sect of Arabs, have their cities well fortified, with plenty of sheep and camel, and some of the residents evicted from Gaza are planned to live in communities there. I haven't seen the homes yet, but I'm told they plan to live over there. I'm told they plan to live all over the state, but as they break up the settlement movement, but I haven't seen yet where they've been resettled. But the Golan is a magnificently green, fertile, hilly, volcanic region, and the Syrian former embankments have been turned into almost a museum. We ran into United Nations forces composed of Australian and New Zealand and American and Canadian, all young men, fully uniformed, very friendly, and we shared a gun turret with them, looking out on what must have been a record win by the Israelis, of course. But if you study military history, as I have in the various colleges, where they teach you Israeli victories and Israeli battles, not just the 1967 Six-Day War, but the 73, which lasted 3 weeks, was an even greater victory. And I know of no other country that has such great victories from nations that attack them, that constantly give back what they achieved. And they gave back, of course, the oil that they found and discovered in the Sinai. They gave back the air bases in the Sinai. That was through Menachem Begin. And we then had tours throughout Judea and Shomron, where we saw Jenin and Nablus and Shechem, and all cities with major Arab populations that have grown exponentially since I was there 15 years ago. And from a distance, they look quite attractive. And nothing is more attractive, of course, than the minarets and the mosques, which tower above them, centrally located. And in front of them all is the so-called fence. And the fence is also, of course, an environmental hazard, but it is for security, for safety. The Jews aren't going around shooting up civilians willy-nilly, and you don't have a fence put up because you want to have a fence. In America, we have fences, and we decorate them and so on. We don't want to know our neighbor, we put up a fence. If we don't want to have through traffic, we put up a fence. But here they put up a fence that is quite high, quite strong, and is meant to prevent terrorism, and meant to prevent sabotage, and to prevent smuggling of weapons, where you don't have children blown up, and you don't have Sbarro pizzas blown up, and you don't have cafes blown up, not just once, but twice, 3 times, right before we left. The same cafe in Tel Aviv was blown up again. And so you have this fence around all these different communities, and I certainly wouldn't want to live under those circumstances where you have to be checked, and you have to be rechecked, and you have to have all your goods turned inside out. But on the other hand, I don't go around sending terrorists out. I don't recruit children to send bombs out, and I don't ask my women to send blessings on this activity and say we're going out to kill our enemies and so on, because most other countries wouldn't resolve it with just a fence, and most other countries wouldn't be so tolerant. And we went to a school that had come into existence with the existence of the fence of 2 years. And school was 2 years old. It has some 700 Arab children, and they're being taught to coexist with Hebrew children. You shouldn't think that this is such a magnificent accomplishment. Normally, we don't do that here in America, or apparently they don't do it in Europe, but in Israel it's a necessity. And it's an unusual necessity because it took a lot of doing. And they were delightful kids, and we heard from the regional mayor, who was Muslim, and we heard from the principal, who was Muslim, and she advised how many successes and many programs. They even celebrate Israel Independence Day together. That, to me, was the most significant accomplishment, because the Hatikva, the national anthem, talks about a Jew yearning to be free in his homeland, and I can't see how that would be appealing to the average Arab student or his family, living behind the fence, having their goods secluded, and so on. And the mission we were on was quite open about these matters. And we were in the Ben Gurion University in the town of Beersheba, where my aunt lives. And I had a relative and a lawyer in almost every place we went. And if I should have had 5 minutes on my own, they were well occupied with one or the other. And we listened to the various professors of universities, which are universally liberal, unless you go to, of course, the Arab universities, which are universally religious. And the revolution doesn't come from the numb and the dumb. And these universities receive their money from well-connected religious sources. Of course, they have been already documented in all the newspapers, many of them connected to terrorist forces. But the Israeli universities are open and free to all kinds of press and to nationalist forces that preach anti-Israel rhetoric. And you study as you do it in America. I mean, the agitation on campuses in America is quite notorious. We've gone to, I don't know how many dozens and dozens of universities, and always you'll find Israel bashing caused and agitated by pro-Muslim forces, and also funded from the same sources. And here at Ben Gurion University, we learned very much about the European system and the European Union. I don't know, they call themselves the EU. They go around calling themselves the EU. It might scare people, but they do it nonchalantly. And there's a problem with the Bedouin. But the Bedouin, however, are not the American Indian. The American Indian had a tribal system, and the tribal system had designated territory, and each tribe knew where the other one was, and they lived off certain tracts of land, and that was their land. And at the same time, they made treaties for specific tracts of land, and we violated those treaties. It's acknowledged, and we had an act of genocide here in America by the Spanish, who treated the Indians like non-entities, like they weren't people, and gave them diseases intentionally and wiped out their food sources, which they had conserved quite nicely, such as the buffalo. But the Bedouin weren't treated in that fashion. The Bedouin didn't live in that fashion. They didn't have certain tracts of land. There was a different tribes. They were nomads. Mark Twain wrote about it in the 1800s, that the whole place was a wasteland until the Jews came and settled it and turned it green and got water from the desert. And Beersheba itself was based on one well. You read about it in Genesis, where Abraham is negotiating as the first lawyer for one well for 7 sheep. Beersheba, 7 sheep for one well. And from that one well, they now have a huge oasis. And, of course, the Bedouin are not the ones making war against Israel, and they are seen with their sheep and their homes now, and it's a problem to be worked out. And we should all have different people as nice to us as the Bedouin. It would have been a better existence. But the Jews are the ones who settled and bought every piece of land. We bought all the land. You think we were given the land? You think after we were expelled and isolated and thrown to all corners of the earth, that when we came back to Israel after I don't know how many wars and how many Holocausts, that people said, here, take this? Of course not. We paid exorbitant rates to Arab Fedayeen owners and to other owners, and every piece of land was bought and purchased for. And that's how you deal in land. Universally, land is recognized by a certain process. And all lawyers know this and judges know this. And universities don't. That's all I got to say about that. But we all look for justice. And justice can be achieved in many ways, and there's nothing worse than seeing people believing they have not achieved justice who are not your enemy. And Israel is a nation that strives for justice and wrestles with justice in every circumstances. And our mission showed us how many problems there are, monumental problems all over the country. And the Jews have problems as soon as they wake up. And in a country filled with problems like this, it's amazing how much fun they have. And the end of the tour was Jerusalem Day, with the rockets flying over Jerusalem with glares and flares, not with tragedy. And we were greeted by the mayor, and my own attorney gave a wonderful reception at the Jerusalem Bar with judges from the highest court of Israel. When we went into the Supreme Court of Israel, we saw them in action, and much like our own highest courts, and no different. And the difference on the walls, as one judge pointed out, is that they don't put "In God We Trust." In the Holy Land, they don't write "In God We Trust." They consider themselves a secular country. It's a Jewish state, but a secular country. It's a Jewish state, but it's a democracy. It's a Jewish state, but if you raise the issue of putting "In God We Trust" on the money or on the courts, as we do here, you run into a lot of arguments. And they tell you there's a lot of screaming throughout Israel. And we didn't hear it, but there's certainly a lot of didactism whereas that's it, and they don't raise certain issues, at least not to us. And I would have liked to have seen and the spiritual origin of monotheism for all of us, that they recognize God has a lot to play in our lives and in all the miracles that they live with all the time. 49 Scuds landed in Israel in the first Gulf War, and the 49 Scuds landing in Israel in the first Gulf War, and none of them exploding and doing harm to civilians and just creating craters, that's God working overtime. And he deserves a place on the wall in God We Trust, in my opinion. You know, I don't speak for our organization in all of these matters by any means. But when I'm the solo guest on the show, I have a right to say a few things. That's why we usually do interviews. I can't help it if everybody went to sleep. I can't help it if I have jet lag, but I'm still here talking. And we had quite a mixture of various opinions and various ages and various strengths, and they all came through this trip very well. And we were hosted by the American Israel Friendship League, and you couldn't get a better host. You had the finest accommodations and wonderful vegetarian food a lot of times, very healthy food, and they even agreed to go to something I've belonged to all my life, the Society to Preserve Nature in Israel. Now, the Society to Preserve Nature in Israel has thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of sites throughout the country, and head of the organization, and we were addressed always by the heads of everything. I mean, what's the equivalent of the Attorney General for the state, and the the heads of the courts, from Be'er-Sheva, from district courts, federal, state courts equivalent, and the head of this organization, she said that you have to be concerned with the quality of the life, with how you live, not just where you're going to live, but how you live. And you need the space, you need the environment, you need to hear the birds. You need to hear, as it is in Mary Poppins, a play coming here, the birds sing in your ears. And they create these places because Israel geographically is located on the crossroads. It has the desert and the forest and the tundra and the winter and the spring and the summer and the fowl and the mammals of all the continents of Asia and Europe and Africa and the whole Middle East region, as well as the religions of all the regions. Of Buddhism, the Baha'i Temple is in Haifa, and the Muslim faith, and Christian and Jewish, it's all combined right there. And you have the waterfalls of the Negev, and you have the Haibar region to save animal species. Israel is the only country that is trying to save animal species, that has a biblical zoo that has been expanded from the tiny Central Park Zoo it once was to a zoo that is larger than the Bronx Zoo. And it's all outdoors with a Noah's Ark kind of concept. And you've got to see it to believe it. And if these animals leave Israel and go to the Arab neighbors, unfortunately they're often just shot, as they were in Iran, where conserved species were just slaughtered when Khomeini came in. And thank God Israel is doing this, because as you see the red and blue curtains, there is a constant conflict behind me. And that conflict is being resolved every day in Israel. It's a constant balance, and we pray for the success in the future that Isaiah, the lamb and the lion will dwell together in peace, will come true, and that the blood will not run so much, and that conservation will win out, and religious motifs will triumph for good. And I wish everybody well. This Memorial Day, we've commemorated a lot of dead, a lot of people who fought for our country, and our country's been a blessing to the whole world, as has Israel. And it's only fitting that the two should be allies in all respects. And that was very well brought out on this mission, and is essential for the future, because the two countries, the United States and Israel, are the great bastion against terror. And Israel has guards for every occasion. And it was observed for the Shavuos, and I wish everybody a very joyous Shavuos. It's a celebration of our 10 Commandments, and if you live by these 10 Commandments, you can't go wrong. And the children were out by thousands celebrating.